Welcome to stop number 21 on our journey through the Word. This is the stop for 1 Chronicles chapter 22. If you have a Bible, go ahead and open it to 1 Chronicles 22. If you don't have a Bible, go grab one and make sure that you grab a pen and some paper so that you can take notes as we study this morning. Again, make sure that you have your Bibles open to 1 Chronicles chapter 22. A number of years ago, I got to go on a foreign mission trip for the first time ever, and it was quite the experience. It really took me out of my comfort zone, and it took me nearly 6 months after that to decide if I wanted to ever go back to that country. And it took me about another 5 months to really be mentally and emotionally ready once I decided, I really do want to go back. So a couple years passed and a second trip came, and it was far from over when I knew that I didn't want it to be the last time I visited that country. For months now, I've been selling extra things that I have that I don't use, I don't want, and I've been saving that up for the next trip. And I've got a goal, and I've put effort into saving and preparing for that next trip. The hardest part for me, though, is actually the saving. Because there are times when something comes up and I think, I could just reallocate these funds to something else. But then I think about the opportunity to see my friends that I've made in that country, to be able to catch up with them and spend some time with them, and that motivates me to do the hard work of not reallocating those funds. And we all have things that motivate us to put forth a lot of effort. I think about athletes, and they think towards a championship, or some of them have their eyes on the Olympics, or maybe it's a particular record that they want to be able to set for themselves. Think about actors and actresses, and maybe it's earning an Oscar or an Emmy, and so they work hard at their craft to be able to achieve that level of excellence. Scientists, politicians, and writers may all dream of one day achieving a Nobel Prize in their particular field. For the rest of us, there are times when we have a goal that's just maybe achieving a home repair that we want or need done. Maybe it's we know that the car is nearing the end of its life and we need to think about replacing it. Or for others, it's how do I pay for education? I want you to think about what motivates you to do hard work. In 1 Chronicles chapter 22, we read that King David is nearing the end of his life, and he has been motivated to some hard work. I'm going to begin reading in 1 Chronicles chapter 22, verse 14. He says, "I have worked hard to provide materials for the building of the temple of the Lord. Nearly 4,000 tons of gold and 40,000 tons of silver, and so much iron and bronze that it cannot be weighed. I have also gathered timber and stone for the walls, though you may need to add more. You have a large number of skilled stonemasons and carpenters and craftsmen of every kind. You have expert goldsmiths and silversmiths and workers of bronze and iron. Now, begin the work, and may the Lord be with you." Then David ordered all the leaders of Israel to assist Solomon in this project. "The Lord your God is with you," he declared. "He has given you peace with the surrounding nations. He has handed them over to me, and they are now subject to the Lord and his people." Now seek the Lord your God with all your heart and soul. Build the sanctuary of the Lord God so that you can bring the ark of the Lord's covenant and the holy vessels of God into the temple built to honor the Lord's name. As I said, David's nearing the end of his lifetime. He has achieved incredible things as king of Israel, but he has one goal left undone, and that's the construction of the temple. Since the days of Moses, some 475 years earlier, the Ark of the Covenant and the sacred objects had been in the tabernacle. They'd moved all over with the people of Israel during the Exodus, and then they moved into the land of Israel under Joshua. That had been God's dwelling place among men. And at the time that David is speaking here, the tabernacle is about 5.5 miles away from Jerusalem in a town called Gibeon. But earlier in his lifetime, David had brought the Ark of the Covenant into the city of Jerusalem, and it had been there in a tent. And David wanted to build a temple to honor God. But an interesting thing had happened when he went to God and he laid out his plans. God had actually told David, no, you're not going to do that. Look back in chapter 22 at verses 8 and 9. God told David, but the Lord said to me, you have killed many men in battles you have fought. And since you have shed so much blood in my sight, you will not be the one to build a temple to honor my name. But you will have a son who will be a man of peace. I will give him peace with his enemies and all the surrounding lands. His name will be Solomon, and I will give peace and quiet to Israel during his reign. Now, if it had been me, I might have been tempted to look at God and say, but this project was my idea, not Solomon's. Or another potential response might be, but he won't do it the right way, God. And of course, by the right way, I would mean my way. But that wasn't David's response. Instead, David accepted God's will. He also, however, did not set the project entirely aside and say, okay, it's his problem and I'm not going to do anything about it. Instead, what David did was he began preparing for construction. He did what he could do to prepare his son Solomon for success in achieving this task. David starts this passage by saying, I have worked hard. Now, depending on the translation of Bible you have, David may be recorded as saying, I've made great pains. The Hebrew word there for that David used is also relating the idea of affliction. Building the temple wasn't just a building program for David. It wasn't just another item on a checklist that he wanted to complete. It was under his skin. It was something that ate at him, that drove him to complete this project. You see, honoring God with the building of a temple, David saw it worth his time and his effort and his every sacrifice. It was a noble and worthy goal. He tells us here that he had gathered 4,000 tons of gold. So I did some calculations. That's about 8 million pounds. And that I just have a hard time wrapping my brain around that. And so I decided I was going to check on the value. Roughly how much is that worth in today's dollar? Now, the current value of gold is somewhere around $1,700 per ounce. And there's about then $28,000 per pound of gold in today's market. And that translates to roughly $224 billion. Get that, $224 billion worth of gold. To try to capture that a little bit more, I found one source that said if you took that much gold and you made 1 foot square cubes, that amount of gold would fill a 2-car garage from floor to ceiling. That kind of blows my mind. That much gold. To help us understand how much gold that is worth in today's dollar, Jeff Bezos, the founder and chairman of Amazon, he's the richest guy in the world, the single wealthiest person in the world. And his net worth is around $116 billion, just under half of the value of the gold that David had gathered for the building of the temple. And David keeps going and he says, oh, and by the way, I've got 40,000 tons of silver. That's about 80 million pounds of silver. In today's prices, that comes out to about $23 billion. Just the value of gold and silver means that David was wealthier than Jeff Bezos is today by twice the amount. Absolutely incredible to me. And then David says, I've gathered so much iron and bronze, we stopped keeping records because it wasn't worth it. We have so much that it was easier just not to weigh it out. And then we've gathered timber and stone. He doesn't give us any idea of the quantity there, but then he looks at Solomon and says, you might need some more of that. Wow. How long does it take for a man to gather that much gold, silver, stone, timber, iron, bronze? Imagine the warehouses that would need to be built to hold all of that. Okay, we've got 1 2-car garage for the gold, but my goodness, the rest of it must have just taken up acres. Imagine all the laborers that were needed in order to transport all of those goods from other lands into the land of Israel. And then to inventory it all, and then to guard it all, because I don't think David was leaving $224 billion worth of gold unguarded. How much space does that all require just to store it? And then David says, I've gathered all kinds of skilled craftsmen, stonemasons and carpenters and goldsmiths and silversmiths and bronze workers and iron workers, and I've got crews ready to go to work, Solomon. Imagine the years of training that went into developing all those craftsmen. The quantity of tools that would have had to be on hand so that they would be ready to begin work. Then all the workspace that they would need in order to do their crafts, in order to bring everything in and begin assembling the temple. And on top of that, all of these workers need food and housing as well. David's concept of the temple was not a simple nor small one. This temple was going to be absolutely magnificent. It was going to be an awe-inspiring structure, and David had gone to great pains to make sure that his son Solomon was adequately prepared to begin construction. All of that, David said, was for the honor of the Lord's name. The honor of the Lord's name motivated David to do this hard work. What motivates you to do hard work? Now, I'm not necessarily talking about employment, even though our labor for our employer is supposed to reflect our love for God. That's not specifically what I'm talking about. Does honoring God motivate you to give finances to your local church family? Does honoring God motivate you to give your material possessions to meet needs within the church or within the community? Does honoring God motivate you to give time to the church? Does honoring God motivate you to work hard in church ministry? As Americans, we tend to see church involvement as a social activity in many cases, or we see church involvement as simply volunteering with charitable organizations. And while those things are true to an extent, they fail to capture the biblical idea of what a church is and does. Even that term of church involvement can communicate a dangerously inadequate idea. Christians are to be engaged in the life of a church because it honors God. Christians are supposed to be giving of their finances and their material possessions, of their time and their energy, because it honors God. So this week, your homework is to consider who gets your hard work. Now be careful, because it's easy for us, especially if we've been in church for any amount of time, to immediately respond with, well, God does. But I want you to really take an honest, hard look at who gets your hard work. Does your employer get the best of your work? The hardest of your work? Is it your family that receives the most effort that you have to put out? Is it yourself that you work hardest for? Or is it God? The second part of your homework assignment this week is to jump in and work on reading through the Bible this week. We've got a link to the Bible reading plan that we're using in the description below, and grab that and do some reading and start putting some effort into honoring God with your time if you haven't been reading along with us already. So I want you to think about what would it look like if you and I worked hard to honor God, harder than any other goal we have. If that was our top priority, and I'm going to put my hardest work into honoring God, what would that look like? And please understand, I don't mean that we should return to the days of cathedral building. That's not where I'm going with this. But we have families in our communities who have been out of work for months. Do they need help with food? Do they need help with paying utilities, rent, insurance? Think about all of the teachers and school administrators who have had this difficult task of education simply compounded by the events of the last 2.5 months. Encourage them. Send them notes or find ways of lifting their spirits because of the additional effort that they've had to put into trying to educate and care for their students. Maybe it's trying to figure out, how do we as a church minister to kids when camps and VBSs won't necessarily be an option this summer? How are we taking care of our kids and discipling them in a summer that's not going to look normal? This week, will you work hard to honor God? I hope you have a great week. I hope you're enjoying the spring-like weather, the summer-like weather. But above all, I hope that you will work hard for the honor of the Lord's name.